If you haven't heard yet, I just launched Future of Work Leaders, a global community of the world's top people leaders shaping the future of work and employee experience. If you are interested in learning more and requesting an invite, and if you are a chief human or chief people officer, then head on over to futureofworkleaders.com. Again, that is futureofworkleaders.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special holiday edition of Future Ready Leadership. And first, I have to say Happy New Year. I hope 2025 is going to be amazing for you. And I hope, of course, it'll be amazing for this podcast as well. Today, we're going to be giving you access to a couple episodes that were previously not available for free subscribers. So they were exclusive episodes, and we're going to share some of those clips with everyone today. And we're going to be talking about practical strategies and frameworks that are going to help you lead more effectively in 2025. So first up, we have Rachel Cooke. She's the former director of HR at American Express, and she's host of a very popular podcast called the Modern Mentor Podcast and founder of Lead Above Noise. And she brings a lot of wealth of experience in driving organizational success through people-focused strategies. And so in this clip, Rachel's going to be sharing a very powerful framework that can help you get the best out of your teams and the best out of your people. It's really about empowering your teams to perform at their best and how to be proactive in their roles. So let's jump right into this first clip from Rachel Cooke. Let's say you were advising a company or you were building a leadership development and training program. So what would that mean? Because obviously there are some courses, there are some frameworks and stuff like that you alluded to, which people need to learn stuff. How does the rest of that kind of manifest as far as practicing, having the space to be able to do that? How do you give that time and that space to do that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So again, the first thing, if an organization comes to me and says, hey, we need a program on delegation because our leaders are really bad at delegating. The first thing I would do is I would have some conversations with leaders around talk to me about why you're not delegating. And almost never is the answer, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to, or I don't know how. There are always reasons why not. And so I think the first way it manifests is getting a little bit of feedback back to the sponsors of a program to say, yep, we're going to run this program and we're going to create some momentum, but here's some of your accountability as a senior leader within this organization.
Yeah.
You need to create more room for failure that generated learning, and you need to create more airtime for more junior people on the org chart to present in meetings, right? So there's the feedback up to the top of the organization to help them understand where they need to make changes. But then within the context of the program, like I said, I love running these cohort-based programs. So you have a single cohort of people that come together, once a month over 6 months or twice a month, whatever it is, but they come together periodically. And so the way that we run people through a program, if we're talking about delegation, we sort of bring them together in the beginning. We talk about, why delegation matters. I think the first thing we have to do is help. Sometimes we throw all this, you have to be coaching and delegating and giving feedback, and it's overwhelming and exhausting. And so, helping leaders understand, how is this going to actually help you do your job better? Here's how we get you bought in. Then we're going to teach you the framework, but then we're going to have you actually go into a breakout, and we're going to have you actually share in that breakout a time that you delegated and it backfired. You're going to talk a little bit about that. You're going to get a little feedback from your peers. We're going to come back together. You're going to choose something here in this room that you are going to try delegating before the next time we come back together. And we teach a framework that is, I call it developmental. So part of it is we tend to think delegation is a binary. I did or I didn't. What about delegating one small piece? What about making sure you're choosing the right person to delegate to? So we sort of talk through all of these levers, all of your areas of accountability. And then we ask you to choose one thing that you're going to put into action. Not, I'm going to delegate this entire client pitch to the new guy on my team, but you know what? I am going to choose one project and one person. And before the next meeting, I'm going to write down 3 reasons why I think this is the right person and how I'm going to set them up for success. That's
Yeah.
your only accountability before the next session. And then we build upon that over time. So by the time you leave the program, you have this strong capability, but it's not like you came in, we taught you a framework, you went back and didn't use it. And well, obviously that program failed.
Yeah, then it's kind of a waste. No, that approach makes a lot more sense. How would you describe the framework? Is this a framework to activate teams inside of organizations? Is that kind of how you describe it?
Yes,
Okay.
a framework to activate teams.
Okay.
Mhm.
So activating teams, I guess we could think of this is a framework for how to make sure that your teams are performing at their maximum potential, so to speak. And so we're going to go over these four action, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I see you're shaking your head a
No,
little bit
no,
there.
you're good.
So this 4-step framework to activate teams, deliver, develop, connect, and thrive. So why don't we go through
Mhm,
what this framework actually is,
mhm.
and perhaps we can spend 1 to 2 minutes on each one of them, and you can
Sure.
explain what it is and maybe some action items that people can take for each one of those.
Yeah. So I would say the one sort of correction I would make is I wouldn't call it 4 steps. I would call it 4 pillars because I don't think there is necessarily a sequence there. But for
Okay.
me, when we talk about, what does it mean to activate teams? The phrase I like to use is performing teams do what they're asked, but activated teams are asked what they would do. Um, to
Ah,
me, giving somebody a set of instructions and expecting them to perform them is kind of table stakes. But what we are
yeah.
looking for today in this world of so much uncertainty, we need more than people doing stuff, right? We need their ideas, we need them speaking up, we need their innovation, we need their collaboration. There's so much that we need from them. And this framework for me is really about how we get there. So, as leaders who maybe feel overwhelmed because, again, my employees are asking for everything in the whole world, and I need performance, and we got to do employee engagement. We'll do that later, right? It's like, no, no, no. We're going to really just streamline and simplify. I think as leaders, it is really incumbent upon us to create the conditions in which our teams can do these 4 things. They can deliver, develop, connect, and thrive. And deliver just means they are able to show up and do the work we have hired them to do. Um, People really do. They take jobs feeling passionate and excited, and then they show up and they're like, oh my God, these processes are so complicated. And I'm sitting in meetings all day that I don't belong in. And like, oh, I can't get the data that I need from that team because that guy's on vacation. And there are so many like obstacles in the workplace that make people exhausted at the end of the day, but not exhausted because they left it all in the field, exhausted because we have sucked their souls out of their eyeballs, right? And so the first thing we need to do as leaders is just understand like how do we make everybody's jobs just a little bit easier to do? That is the first piece. The second piece is develop. So how do we help people kind of grow and feel stretched and challenged and gain new skills and capabilities? The third is connect. So, how do we help them feel connected to or part of this organization, part of a community? How do we help them connect with customers and outcomes? I don't care what your job is in an organization. You should feel like whether you're in sales, client delivery, or product, whether you are in finance or HR, whether you're on the janitorial staff, you should feel like the work that you are doing somehow ultimately contributes to an outcome that is meaningful to the company or the customer. And finally, thrive, which is about people feeling well and balanced and whole and recognized. And when we get these things right, when everybody can deliver, develop, connect, and thrive, organizations get great work, they get new skills, they get people collaborating and caring about the customer, and they get their healthcare costs reduced. And employees get fulfilled, right? They
Yeah.
feel like, oh, I'm doing great work and I'm learning new things and I feel part of a community and I'm healthy. And so it's a win-win. And I think what is incumbent upon leaders is to really understand. And I talk to leaders all the time about how this is a dial, not a switch. I am not asking you to ask your employees what is absolutely every single thing that makes it hard for you to deliver, develop, connect, and thrive. Give me a list and I'm going to go change them all tomorrow. That is not at all what I ask leaders to do. I ask them to just start using this language in conversations in order to give you the employee experience that I think you deserve and that we need. I want you to be able to deliver and develop and connect and thrive. And we start to just ask questions like, hey, what is just like one annoying thing, Jacob, that like when you wake up on Monday morning, you're like, I wish that was a little cleaner, a little simpler, a little easier. Just asking questions, finding low hanging fruit that you can pluck and really focusing on tangible actions and behaviors over big splashy programs. So
Mm.
I talk to organizations all the time when they're like, I get it. I think these are great questions, but I'm really afraid to ask because I'm worried that I won't be able to implement what my employees are asking for.
Yeah.
And I always tell them, you know what? Somebody might ask you for some fancy recognition program, or they may ask you to send them on some really pricey executive leadership program. But I guarantee you, there's one process you can probably simplify, and like somebody could really benefit from just a mentor or just helping somebody carve out an hour a week to watch a TED Talk or read a book, right? Or just bringing customer data to the forefront and reminding people, hey, listen, I know you're in finance, but when you create that spreadsheet and it goes to sales and then sales does blah, 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 you're really contributing to a customer outcome, right? There are these actionable, tangible things that are within our locus of control that we can be doing. And that's what I really counsel leaders to focus on.
Okay. So if we were to think of some action items for people listening and watching as they go through this framework, where would you begin? So maybe we start with deliver. Uh,
Yeah.
how do people begin? Are there any steps that they can take? I mean, I'm assuming we're probably talking to maybe some senior level leaders out there. Where do they start with this?
Yeah, so I would love to imagine a marketing manager who's leading a team of 4 marketing analysts. Let's start
Okay.
there. And I would say to this marketing manager, "Hey, ask your team, like, what is one frustrating thing in your typical week? Just tell me." And you will hear things like, it's really hard to get the data from this other team because they control it. And maybe the marketing manager says, great, I'm going to go talk to that team's leader about getting us direct access. Maybe it's, oh my God, our hire, we have all these open roles and we have 17 people that need to interview every candidate. Is there a way to streamline that a little bit? Can we cut 2 people out of that interview process? It's just asking. It's asking for small increments of change.
Okay. So it seems like this starts with just having conversations with your
Yeah.
employees, getting a
Mhm.
sense of what their frustrations are, what their challenges are. And then I think the more important part, like you said, is to actually take a step to do something with
Mhm.
it. Like you said, walking over
Mhm.
to that other team and trying to figure out how to get direct access to the data. So I think that's something any leader can do. Very simple, very straightforward. What about develop?
Yes. Yeah, and I want to add to that. I think, a lot of organizations, they have an employee engagement survey, right?
Yeah.
They run it once a year, once every other year. And then and that is where you get your statistical validity and your measurement. It's where you do months and months of analysis. This is literally, I talk to you today, I take action tomorrow. I think this framework helps you really supplement your employee engagement efforts. On the development front, same thing. Jacob, tell me what's your ambition? What is something you want to learn, or who's somebody in this organization you might be interested in talking to, or what part of the overall flow of our business don't you understand? How can I help you learn that, grow that? Not, I have a $50,000 budget and I'd like to send you to a really high price conference. And by the way, if you do, go for it. But what or like how do you how's the feedback that I give you? Is it actionable? Is it useful? What's one thing I could do to give you feedback that you feel you can make more use
Hmm.
of? Simple questions
And I
just like
suppose
that.
there's also accountability on behalf of the employee to be able
Yes.
to, well, a few things. One, to speak up, and one, to also have that mindset of growth and development, right? Because they need to be the ones that say,
Yep,
I want to learn new skills. I want to get better. I want to have new
that's right.
capabilities. But if somebody's working at a company and they're thinking like, I have no aspirations, no dreams, no motivations, I just want to stay where I am for the rest of my life, there's only so much a leader can really do for you there, right? So you have to have that motivation, the desire to want to develop and to take action to develop.
100%. 100%. And a leader has to establish that accountability.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, connect is the next one.
Yeah, so in terms of connect, I think a lot of that is about, Jacob, I know you spend a lot of your time like building spreadsheets. Like, do you understand how your time in those spreadsheets is impacting our customer? That's a really great way to drive connection. Or, something as simple as, what's something that would make our team meetings feel a little bit more intimate, a little bit more connective? And you'll hear things like, you
Yeah.
know what? manager, it would be great if instead of you spending the first 20 minutes giving us updates, if you could shoot us an email once a week with those
Mm.
updates and we could use those 20 minutes or even 5 of those minutes doing a round robin. Like, what's something interesting you did this week? What is something self-care worthy you did this week? Just changing the conversation. Maybe you'll hear, you know what? It would be really cool if we could take turns running the meeting. That would be interesting. I would love, a chance to sort of drive the connection. Thinking about how we use our synchronous versus our asynchronous time, but what would help you feel more connected to each other and to the customer?
Seems like storytelling can be a pretty powerful piece there. I remember this was many years ago, and somebody can fact check me on this, but I think it was KPMG. They were doing this campaign. Oh man, it must have been 10 years ago, where they were trying to drive, I think, employee engagement programs. And one of the things that they did is they had pictures of employees around offices, and they would have them with quotes that said like, "I help end poverty," or throughout history, because KPMG is a company that's been around for a while. So they
Mhm.
had KPMG employees through various historic events saying like, "I helped do this. I was there for this historic event or that historic event." And that was a pretty powerful engagement campaign for employees, because they realized that even though maybe you're working on a spreadsheet or you're doing something that doesn't seem like it has an impact, as a company, you're really there for these big historical moments and you're helping solve these really big, complex problems. And I think that drove a lot of engagement for the organization. And so it all came down to stories for them.
100%.
Yeah. So maybe the question there could be leaders trying to figure out how can they do a better job of telling stories so that employees
Mhm.
can know how the work they're doing is impacting the employees, the customers, the company as a whole. Probably some interesting things there. And then the last one is thrive.
Yeah. And again, that's really just about like, how do you like to be recognized? Some people want the confetti and some people want a quiet private thank you note. How does that feel good to you? What kind of boundaries do you feel like you need? I personally feel, going back to our earlier conversation, for somebody who may be single and living by themselves, like maybe they don't want to shut off at 5 p.m. Like maybe shutting off of work is anxiety provoking for them. So like
Yeah.
what would help you? Like what do you need your mornings free, or would that make your life better and maybe you work later? Do I give you anxiety when I email you late at night? And just inviting you to give me as the manager feedback on, how do you like to manage your wellness? How do you like to feel recognized? How do you like to set boundaries? Doesn't, and by the way, as the leader, it doesn't mean you are responsible for executing or implementing everything that is said. It does mean that you hear it and you acknowledge it. And you may say, Jacob, I hear you, but you know what? We are supporting a global client base. And so right now, a 5 p.m. shut off isn't completely feasible. This is what I can do. Is this agreeable for you? If it's not, you are empowered to make a different decision. But as your manager in this hypothetical, I have an obligation to ask and to listen
Hmm.
and to help you find, if we can't shut you out at 5 p.m., what's something else we can do that could be more feasible?
Yeah. Hmm. It seems like it all comes down to just talking to your employees and talking to them in these kind of like four different pillars. And funny
Yes.
enough, I think that's one of the things a lot of leaders struggle with, right? Is just treating their employees as human beings instead of workers. And so I think this is a
Yes.
good sort of four-pillar model to get to that point of more humanness inside of the company. Building on our first discussion about team performance, trust is a very critical element for any effective team. And next up, we're going to be hearing from Chris Nicholas. He's the CEO of Sam's Club. It's a division of Walmart, which has reached revenues of over $84 billion. And Chris focuses a lot on leading with transparency and trust. And today, he's going to share his approach to fostering trust, which is so vital for organizational success. So let's jump right into this next clip from Chris Nicholas, the CEO of Sam's Club. For this one, we're going to talk about trust and how to build trust. What does that mean? What does that look like, especially for a leader? But kind of leading into that, I'm actually curious, do you have any leadership guiding principles or mantras that you use that kind of define your approach to leadership?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big topic, and I think trust is an excellent one to sort of orient on. I think that you know, let's just I'll touch on something quickly, which is that if you want to create, your job ultimately as a business leader is, as a leader is, as a CEO in particular, is you've got to leave the place better than when you found it. You need to have a winning strategy. You need to go and get after it. And to do that, you need to respect the past. You need to embrace the culture. But really importantly, you need to create this sense of positive dissatisfaction for where you've got to go. And that's really hard because if people need to believe in you, and I'll go into like this trust, the thing I call the trust equation. I call it. I've learned over the years this idea that you can. So in retail, in particular, very competitive, and the idea that you don't continuously have this sort of positive dissatisfaction means you're just going to get eaten alive at some point, and you maybe just don't see it coming. There's this saying in retail, which is that loyalty in retail is the absence of something better. So, like, you better create that better thing, otherwise people will. So, if you need to take 100,000 people with you on that journey, they better trust you, because otherwise they're not going to come along with you on that journey. And yes, there's work to do with the board and with your sort of shareholders and others, but the hard work is taking the whole organization with you. And I've found that thinking about trust in an equation is really helpful. Now, this maybe makes me sound a little bit like the economist that I am, but the trust is a function of credibility plus reliability plus intimacy. All of that is divided by self-interest. Otherwise said, if you're credible, i.e., you've done the job before, people know that you're going to be great. If you're reliable, you do what you say you're going to do, and you take the time to create intimate relationships, that's fine. But if people don't believe that you are not there for them, people need to believe you're there for them. They need to believe that you care about their purpose. You need to believe you're connected with their culture, because the second they don't believe that denominator divided by self-interest undermines everything. So the idea of creating a strategy that embraces everybody, that creates this sense of belief that you respect the past and you respect the culture, and you show that is actually the time spent doing that is actually the thing that allows you to run really hard at the future. So this idea of people being able to see in a leader that you are not leading with self-interest, I think is all important. I really do. If you want to move a mass of workforce quickly and effectively in the right direction, and there are a whole load of ways to do that, and I found that the most impactful way is to listen to people and take action.
So how do you make this equation come to life? So there are a lot of leaders who are listening and watching this. They're thinking, I love that equation. I want to make it come to life on my team, in my company. How do you do that? Like, is it possible to break that down into like a series of steps? Like, if you could give people, I don't know, 3 to 5 actions to take to create trust with their team, could you, is it possible to break it down into those steps?
Yeah, I mean, everyone will find the environment that they're in, and they will decide what the right steps are for them. But what's worked for me, the first thing you have to do is you have to have a team that are aligned with where you want to go, a leadership team.
Okay.
If you don't have a leadership team that are aligned with where you want to go, you don't get to do anything else. Because
what if you're not in a leadership role to be able to shape that team? So you're not a top executive, maybe you're a mid-level leader and you can't really shape much of that leadership team. You're just kind of a part of a team, but you want to still kind of create trust.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we can, fine. So answering as a CEO, job number one is like having a group of folks that want to come along with you on the journey, because without that sort of sense of common purpose, now that common purpose for some people might be money, fine, but it's just not for me. But that's certainly a journey. The self-interest piece and the intimacy piece is the important bit. So one of my mentors tells me often of the importance of connection. So the reason I'm in clubs and facilities and visiting suppliers is I'm building intimacy with people. I'm understanding about them, they're understanding about me. Why? Because having common purpose is important, and that doesn't mean sharing my purpose, like as in what do I want from you. It's I do better by understanding what Jacob wants out of me and what I want out of Jacob, and we will come to a collaborative, positive outcome as a result. If you're not spending time when you're creating these intimate relationships with people, if you're not spending time understanding what they want and you spend all of your time telling them, you're doing it wrong. If you don't be doing more than 50% of the speaking. Do more, orient on the listening. And this idea of trust happen. So I love this thing of trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets. And this idea of you need to spend. So there's a guy that previous CEO of Coca-Cola, he tells me often that if you're not having good quality conversations with 100 people a week, you're not doing your job. Wow. And it doesn't have to be like an hour's meeting. It's finding out something about them, finding out about their business, walking around. I walk around a lot around this office. We have an open plan environment entirely. And what you find is that every single day, just as you walk around and chat to people, you just find things out and people feel validated as a result and they tell their friends. So this intimacy doesn't have to just be one-on-one. It's this environment you create. The self-interest piece, though, I have learned in this job and in my last job that you are never, ever, ever, ever done with communicating the why of what you're doing. It's so important. And often I will remember to tell people that I would not change the past, and I recognize positivity about the current culture. But the one time I forget, I get feedback from people like, you're just changing things. And this is like a year into this job. People still want to hear it. They still want you to reinforce that I am here for you. And I think there's a skill to making sure that you get your point across whilst respecting people, but it's never done. And I'm doing that consistently, whether it's out in facilities, whether it's here in the home office. I'm there connecting and I'm there communicating. And I think as a CEO, your job to be the coach, to be the chief communicator, to be the cheerleader. That's never done. And if you're not spending a significant amount of your time doing that, then you can't expect people to come along with you. Another really cool saying that I once heard, and I'm sorry to keep bringing out all of these sayings, but you did ask, is that if you don't tell people about yourselves, about you, about who you are, about sharing things about you. Why did I share about running? Because I wanted to create give you some of me. I shared some of my family because I wanted to get. If you don't do that, people will fill the vortex because people want to know about you. The thing that was a shock becoming the CEO was just how carefully people watch and listen. And it's not just the big things. It's not just the stuff on the stage. It's if you walk to get a coffee and you're looking at your phone instead of have your head up, people will infer something from it. So this idea of understand.
You're really viewed and scrutinized as a leader, huh? Like people
all
look
of
at every
the time.
Yeah.
And so, but that's okay. So if you know it, anyway. So
that's actually really interesting because a lot of people don't think about that, right? I mean, if you're a junior level employee and you're walking to get a coffee and you're looking down or staring at your phone, nobody's going to think something of that. But if they see you as a top executive or as a CEO doing that, they might think, is something wrong? Chris looks upset. Is the business struggling? So in a sense, you kind of, I guess you always have to be on.
Yeah.
But then how do you also balance the vulnerability side with that? Because you also don't want to fake, if you're going through a tough time or if the company's struggling, it's also important to be able to communicate that with your employees. So how do you balance the importance of the vulnerability and authenticity with the always being on? Because that's also probably an important factor of building trust. If you're not genuine and people are like, yeah, I know something's wrong, but Chris is just always smiling and walking around, that doesn't help with trust either.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And I think that that idea of authenticity is really important. You use the word, and I think it's a crucial word. Um, and that idea of constantly being connected with people, not just your leadership team, that doesn't work. It needs to be deep. Allows people to, first of all, if people feel positively towards you as a person, they will give you the benefit of the doubt. The second thing is, if you inadvertently send a message through, having a furrowed brow because you had an argument at home or whatever it might be, that you'll hear about it and someone will tell you, and then you can address it. And also just this, like, using humor, being self-deprecating. These are important things because, like I say, people know the realities anyway, and if you avoid them, then what happens is people will make up their own reality. And
Yeah.
so there is definitely a truth to, as a leader, as a CEO, that you have to give more of yourself than you might have been used to. And because if you don't do that, then people will infer things that maybe, they ought not to. And as a leader, like, that can undermine the pace of change that you want to achieve. So you just got to get comfortable with it. It's actually a cool thing to do, and you've got to like people for sure. But as long as you get comfortable with it, you're okay. You can draw lines. I don't share
Yeah.
inappropriate things, but yeah.
It's kind of the, did you ever hear of the reality distortion field idea?
No, what's that?
So the reality distortion field idea, it was developed, I think it was in the 80s, and it was in relation to Steve Jobs and how when he was around different developers and different people, he like shaped this reality because he was so charismatic and he believed so much in the product and the future of Apple that he had the ability to distort the reality of the people he was around, where even if people didn't believe in anything after spending time with Steve Jobs, like that became their new reality. Yes, Apple, Apple. And so it's kind of a concept that's oftentimes described for a lot of leaders where they have this ability to shape this reality and inspire and motivate and engage people in a certain way that they believe in this new reality. Because if they don't, to your point earlier, it's kind of hard to take people on this journey with you.
I love the idea. I think there's a hugely important part to it, as long as it's also grounded in, you get to do that because you're Steve Jobs or you're Elon Musk or you're Doug McMillan or any other, like, trying to create a different future because you see it and you believe on where you go. But the results also need to be real. And,
Yes.
You can't create a reality distortion field and then, and not have the win. And this is where you get to, like, what I said earlier on is your job is to leave the place better than you found it, is to win, is to create a winning strategy. And sure, there is, like, inspiration, and taking people with you is a huge part of that. Huge.
Yeah, to your point, the reality distortion field only works if the reality at some point matches with it. Otherwise, it's kind of a huge waste of time. Maybe one more question for you is, what are the big mistakes that you see leaders make when it comes to building trust? So where do people oftentimes fall down? Where do they stumble? I would imagine, for example, lack of authenticity is a huge one, where they try to create trust, but they don't do it in an authentic way, and people can kind of tell you're BSing them. Have you seen any other mistakes that leaders make when it comes to building trust?
Yeah, I think that you mentioned authenticity. We've talked earlier about the importance of just being straight with people. I think that's all real. I think the big mistake that people will make and do make, and I've seen it myself, is an unwillingness to believe that it's your job as the leader to convince people they should trust you. So this idea of positional authority, this idea of I am in this job and therefore you must, is a fallacy. It's not real. And you can spend all of your time believing that what you're saying is working, but it doesn't. Your job is to convince people, and you do that through listening and by being empathic and by delivering what you say you're going to deliver. And so don't fall into the trap of believing that positional authority confers this ability for you to earn free trust. It's quite the
Yeah.
opposite.
And any other mistakes that you see people make, or is it usually just around that?
Oh, I think I think we are replete with imperfections as leaders. And all of us. And I think maybe one thing that I would say is don't underestimate the power of culture. So, and in fact, you need to use it. So this idea that as a CEO, your job is to come in and put your stamp on things and make sure that it's not the last person's, it's definitely yours, is a real challenge when you're faced with strong culture. The real power is to respect the culture and respect where you are, whether you believe it or not, and build on it. Because then you get to take the energy of the organization with you versus working against the energy of the organization. And I found that to be very effective.
Yeah, that's a great
one. It's a real investment in time.
What do Tractor Supply, Neiman Marcus, Johnson & Johnson, Dow, Lego, Northrop Grumman, and dozens of other companies all have in common? They are all a part of the Future of Work Leaders community. This is a global community of the world's top people leaders shaping the future of work and employee experience. If you're interested in learning more and requesting an invite, and if you are a chief human or chief people officer, then head on over to futureofworkleaders.com. Next up, after dissecting trust, we're going to talk about how to create a people-centric culture. And to do that, we're going to hear from Melanie Dulbecco from Torani. And she's going to be talking about their approach to putting people at the center of their business operations. And you might not be familiar with the brand Torani, but if you see their bottle, you'll recognize it. You've probably consumed their products. They have them in a lot of coffee shops as a way to flavor drinks, flavor coffees. And Melanie is the CEO of Torani, and she's championed a people-first culture for many, many years, embedding real actionable values into every aspect of the company. In fact, I highly encourage you to listen to the full episode if you get a chance to do so. And in this clip, she's going to be sharing practical steps for creating a culture that genuinely values each individual. So I thought it would be really interesting to take a look at this people first or people-centric culture, because what we alluded to earlier is that a lot of companies talk about it, a lot of leaders talk about it, but very few actually do it. So for people who are listening or watching this, and it could be a mix of people, some individual contributors, a lot of them are leaders in some capacity, and they're trying to figure out, how do I create more of that people-centric culture on my team or in my company? If you were coaching them or advising them, what would you tell them to do? How would you approach creating that culture at a different organization?
Yeah. Well, the very first thing I would do is make sure that I had real, authentic core values. I see so many plaques on lobby walls that sound the same as the next company, I think the moment values go onto a plaque, they're dead. That it needs to be in the language and the what you're really going to build. So so the way we developed ours is, when I joined, we already had like a deep history, right? So I sat down with the son-in-law and the granddaughter of the founders. And we had a facilitated conversation. First of all, we looked at our history and said, what was true throughout our history? What were the hard times that we hit, and how do we handle those? And there was a lot of rich, interesting information in there, including a lot of hardships, including with this amazing wife and husband team that started the business. He died in his early 40s of a heart attack in the middle of the Great Depression. And, you know, as a single mom then at that point, right? Terrified about what to do. Like it's in our DNA to be a people first company, right? So it's how her family supported her and said, you're a strong person, you can do this. So we looked at those kinds of moments, and then we talked about what was important to each of us personally. What did we care about? And where was the intersect among those things? And then we developed our core values, and there are principles by which we operate. So One of them is care deeply for people, and we can describe what that means and how it shows up. Another is grow, baby, grow. Right? These
Can
are
you teach caring though? Because that's another one, right? Is we always say care about your people, but is that one of those things where you're either a caring leader or you're not? Can you teach or have you ever had a leader who didn't care and then you teach them to care?
well. No, we wouldn't hire an uncaring person.
Yeah,
We check
I guess
that,
that's true.
right? They don't belong here.
Yeah.
But there are ways that we can demonstrate that in decision making and other things, right? It's like why we would do a zip code map, why we wouldn't have a layoff, why we think about contribution management. But it also means when we talk about our ways of working, so that's just a statement until it becomes the ways of working. So it's articulating that. So when we have just a few. And then when I onboard people, I ask them, what has their experience of Torani been so far? Maybe they've been a consultant and they ended up joining us. That happens a lot. Maybe they went through the interview process and are fairly new, or maybe they've been on board for a couple of weeks. But they all have different work experiences. And I said, what is it? Just as the team chose you, you chose to be here. And there's something that stands out to you about the way we do things around here. What is it that stands out to you that you like, a reason you chose to be here? And I always hear things that relate to our core values, always. Then it makes it personal for them. And we can say, you know what? You know how, Jesus, you talked about this and, whoever it is, right? We connect it to that. And then it's how we make decisions. It's how we hire. It's how we promote. It's how we embed those in the business and use them to make decisions.
Yeah.
How we use them in our stories.
Yeah, one of the things I always say, the values are just words on paper, because a lot of companies actually have very similar corporate values, whether it's like trust or put the company first or put the customer first. And usually when I give talks to organizations or talks at conferences, I always ask attendees, raise your hand if one of your values is trust or innovation, and like 50 or 100 hands go up. And I say, well, if your values are unique, look at all these other companies that have the same values. And so really what matters is how do those values come to life? And it sounds like for you, they come to life in all the different aspects of how employees work there.
Right. So one of our core values and my mantra is grow, baby, grow. So that means it means we have to have a growth mindset. We have to be innovative as a company. We have to constantly push the boundaries of how we're going to create new value to be relevant. But it also means individual learning, growth and development, and team growth and development. So if we're going to double in size every 4 years, it means that we have to be bringing new value to market. It also means that the lagging indicator of our success are the financial metrics, right? The leading indicator is the readiness of our team, the growth and development, and we can measure that in some different ways. So I think, what do companies measure? And we're good at measuring financials. We have all kinds of rules and processes to measure financials, and we need to do that to be successful. But what are the KPIs that concern people? What is someone's turnover? What is the cost of that turnover? What if that was put into pay instead, right? Like we can start thinking differently of some of those KPIs. How many people were promoted from within because they were ready to move into that new role, not just because they got promoted? So we would have written a job description and hired somebody from outside, but this person was ready. And we target a minimum of 25%, but usually we hit 35% of our roles are filled by internal candidates because we focus so much on their being ready. And that helps us grow. It contributes to our business success. So this is where the people practices and the business success go hand in hand.
Okay. So step one, values.
So core values is one for sure.
Okay. And then what would be, so I guess the values, making sure the values are integrated. And what would be, for example, like step 2 or step 3 to create that people-centric culture?
Yeah, I would say step 2, I would ditch performance appraisals and figure out a different process that is much more coaching and development oriented.
Okay.
And really, I mean, in parentheses, really, because it really should be not, and it takes a devoted effort, but it changes the game. When people are more engaged, More training has to go into managers than you might imagine because we're used to telling instead of inquiring. So it's building inquiry skills, which also makes people better business leaders. So that also goes hand in hand.
Okay.
So I think that practice for sure.
Okay. And then maybe one more that you can think of? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah. Well, I can think of a couple. So KPIs is another one.
Okay.
Looking at compensation, how do you share success? Great to do profit sharing, but if everybody in the company can get a bonus, an achievable, reasonable bonus based on top line revenue growth and bottom line profitability, everybody in the company becomes interested in how that happens.
Yeah.
So when we do our town hall meetings, which are super fun, everyone wants to know. And what I love is when we launched our ESOP, and then when we share our ESOP growth and development, we do a lot of financial literacy training. I'm so thrilled when I see a frontline team member coming forward who is in the warehouse, who has questions about the stock value and how that increased and what we did to increase that, right? That is a fantastic thing. So sharing success and tying it with the literacy, and I'd say just start with a bonus. ESOPs can be really hard. It's not for the faint of heart, but bonuses, why not? Why not everybody?
You mentioned KPIs. Obviously, there are kind of the traditional business KPIs. Do you have, or what would you call them, like human KPIs or KPIs that align to your values that go beyond just traditional kind of performance metrics too?
Yeah, it's been really hard for us because they have to be measurable by nature, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
some
the
of these
tricky
are more
part.
subjective. Yeah. So we have, safety is huge. Got to have a safe environment, right?
Yeah.
So we can measure that. Definitely we measure retention. Huge. That says so much about a company. And then we measure how many people are promoted into roles that we would have posted externally. Those are some measures that are important to us that are human factors. But then it comes down to how we work towards our strategies. So it's all tied together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I know we're a couple minutes past the hour. Maybe one last final KPI question. Do you have, so those are organizational KPI metrics. Do you have individual KPI metrics for employees that align to those values or culture or anything?
Everybody has individual goals, and some of those have KPIs. We work with KPIs, of course, but I think one of the things that we haven't talked about that I think is another trick to growth is the way we do strategy and the way we as leaders, like we haven't run this company at twice the size. What is that going to look like?
Yeah.
How are we going to add new value? What has to change in the way we operate? There are these important inflection points in a company's growth. When you get past 50 million and a certain number of people, it's a completely different company. 100 million is another threshold, 250, 500, and now we hear 1 billion is the next one. So we do learning journeys. We learn by forming a team and saying, all right, we're going to do a mid-market growth learning journey. And we're going to talk to as many people as we can who've been there, done that. We're going to talk to Jim Weber from Brooks Running because he went from 50 million to over 1 billion. How do you do that? Oh, you find out it's about scaling culture. What can you learn from Jim Weber about scaling culture? And then you call him up and you talk with him and you meet somebody on his team and it's fantastic. We read books. We do regular learning journeys around different topics. That is a huge way we learn into our future. And so it's another development tool for people who are, it's across levels, but it's great for me to keep learning. It's great for our executive team. It's great for our managers to keep learning into what we want to be when we're twice the size.
Thanks for joining us for this very special episode of the Future Ready Leadership Podcast. To start off 2025 in the right way, we're going to be getting back to our regularly scheduled programming very soon here. And today we've covered a lot about how to enhance team performance, build trust, and create a people-centric culture. And these tools are really going to help you improve your leadership and your organization's potential in 2025. So let's start off strong by putting some of these ideas into action. Thank you so much for listening and for tuning in, and I will see you next week.